Welcome to the Kawartha Small Business Podcast, where we believe the Kawarthas can be the most thriving region in Canada for small business. I'm Brian Rump from Profit Coach.
And I'm Matt Garrity from Managing Digital.
And before we get started, head over to kawarthasmallbusinesspodcast.ca/checklist and download Matt and Brian's marketing checklist for Kawartha small businesses. All right, we are live. Well, you won't hear this live from the Thrive Podcast Studio at Thrive Co-working Community at 18 Kent Street West in downtown Lindsay. And we are here with Erin from Metio Creations. So welcome.
Hi,
Thank
good
you
morning.
for coming. You were telling us this is the most excited you've been since you were on the shopping channel.
Yes,
So-
absolutely. Yes, this actually takes the cake.
Awesome. That's really exciting. I know we have a setup very much like the shopping channel. You have a
Spitting
producer
image.
in your ear now telling you the things to say
Yes.
and not to say. So I hear you're full of stories. So let's start with talking a little bit about yourself and your current venture.
Yeah, so I've had what seems like, as we've kind of been chatting this morning, this like wild career life of all sorts of different jobs and paths and industries, and it's all sort of melded and led me to where I am today with Metio Creations. I'm hand making lifestyle apparel, home decor items with a focus on dead stock and end of line textiles. So really trying to have that like minimal eco footprint, divert textile landfill waste, and see textiles in a different way and just put them to use in a different application than maybe what the textile was originally produced for. So yeah, there's this creative element that I've always had. I went to school for fashion design years ago and visual merchandising and all these different things, and also spent a lot of time in retail and developed my career with a huge foundation there in sales and business development. And so now I've kind of married all of these things with this new small business, and just navigating it every day is a new day. And the roller coaster ride is a real statement. It's a real thing for entrepreneurship, but it's been great so far.
Oh, that's awesome.
I was interested in having you on the podcast because I think it was a year ago we spoke the first time. You were the second person outside of the circle of people that helped start Thrive, that I talked to about Thrive.
Yeah.
And then I remember just being fascinated by your corporate background.
Yeah.
And it sounded extremely corporate and very successful, but then you moved over to this not small business, but like a maker type of business.
Absolutely.
I was just fascinated by that transition. Like, how did that happen? How did you go from something, I don't know how to say, other than so corporate to this?
Yeah. I look back on it and I ask that question every day, and sometimes why? What have you done? But I think, like many people, and it's something I think we're going to hear for a lot of years to come, the pandemic really had a huge impact. So previously, I was the director of business development for all of Canada for a corporate business that did a lot of remodels, resets, renovations. And so my job was kind of sealing the deal on those contracts. And they were very large and with very high profile clients across North America. And when the pandemic hit, like everyone initially, it was a nice little break and vacation and travel, the hustle and bustle. But for me, some of the real huge perks of the job, and they wouldn't be for everyone, but I really enjoyed them. I got to travel everywhere. I got to meet different clients and work with different people, from hospitality to retail. And it was this sort of really, it was stressful for sure. So there was an element of that. But it was really a cool job and a really cool career. And they were based in the US, or they are based in the US. And being the only kind of Canadian salesperson, it was a little siloed, a little lonely. And then you add, the pandemic and all that kind of stuff to it. And really the Canadian market was vastly different through the pandemic than it was in the US. And so about a year and a half in, it just really changed, and I didn't see it changing back. I saw it becoming very different. And sort of to circle back, through the pandemic, when I was at home, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. Like I was used to being on, a flight or more any given week. So I had all this downtime, and my sewing machine had been sitting in the basement for years, and I wanted to help. So I started making masks and matching scrunchies. I developed that into a little bit of a fundraiser for the Alzheimer's Society, which is really near to my family. And so after I raised a bunch of money for the Alzheimer's walk that we were doing that year, people kept asking me to do more things and to make different things. And I had the time. I was home. And it just sort of organically grew. And I put some stuff on Etsy, and it was really growing. And so I was in this sort of battle of like, I've got this career and, kind of high profile position that I really love. And financially it was, very rewarding, but I wasn't satisfied and I wasn't fulfilled. There happened to be a lot of personal loss that happened for me in that year as well. And so I had this outlet that was just really kind of checking those boxes. And at the time it was, looking to be financially lucrative. And I felt like if I gave more time to it, could it be even more lucrative? How could I grow it? And so kind of out of the blue, I just decided to resign and dive right into it. And here we are.
What was most fulfilling about it at the time?
I think having that tangible, I've made this, I've seen the result of it, because in corporate, and especially in business development, it can be a very, very long and drawn out process before you even come to realization of the contract or getting awarded the job. And then you still have to go through and execute it. Like I had some clients that I worked with for 2 years before they ever signed a deal with us. So that's a lot of investment. That's a lot of energy. I enjoyed it, but there was this kind of instant gratification, satisfaction, tangibleness that happened when I would make something, deliver it to someone, they would post it, and it was a little bit different.
Did you ever see yourself before starting your own business?
Yeah, growing up in Lindsay, I was always looking for this creative kind of direction and career, and obviously back then, dating myself a little bit here, but there wasn't as many outlets as there are now. The internet, social media, all those things have kind of opened up platforms that didn't exist before. So I was, searching for different things to fulfill that kind of creative element that was always in me. I did apply right out of high school to go to fashion design, got accepted, and just decided I didn't want to go right away. So went and worked, and then went back to school. And I've kind of done that throughout my career, where I've worked for a number of years and gone back either full-time or part-time and tapped into some of those skill sets that I wanted to round out or add to my experience level. So I've always been creative. I've always made things. I've always had that skill, draw, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, it just kind of was there and felt like the time was right. And I think like a lot of people felt this sense of, well, if not now, when? And do I want to be disappointed in never having tried this in my life? And I think, emotionally, the pandemic drew a lot for people on that, this sort of like looming sense of life is short. And, it was really in our faces to kind of jump in and take advantage of the life that you have in front of you. And it just sort of really resonated for me. So that was where it all fell.
Yeah. I feel like I naturally am an entrepreneur now and a business owner. I'm pretty comfortable being one.
Yeah.
But I never grew up wanting to be
Yeah.
at all. I never wanted to have that lifestyle, this lifestyle. I never had like not schemes, but ideas growing up that I wanted to sell or anything. I always had an idea of what would be my next step if things went bad at my current job. And I usually would have like 1 or 2 next steps in my head.
Yeah.
So I would take a job and like, okay, if this isn't going to go well, this is step 1, here's step 2. And then the last time I was employed and I was thinking, what's step 1 and step 2? And I didn't have one.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, maybe it's just time to do something on my own.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that because I've thought about that more recently. Obviously, when you're, in the thick of entrepreneurship and you have this business, you have to think about like what's ahead, what's next. And it's very different when you're working for a company or a corporation, even though your role and responsibility is to seek out what's next or who you want to work with next. It's a totally different element when like the bills and paying things are on the line. So you have to do it naturally. I think it just happens. But it's so weird because in my life, compared to a lot of my friends, I never had that plan. Like, yeah, I would say when asked at school, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm sure I had, an answer because how do you not? You kind of are under the gun to give an answer. But I never had this map or this plan. Like by 20, I want to be this, or by, I always sort of went with the flow of things, and I worked really hard and I said yes to different opportunities. I hardly ever said no, and I just went with what was presented to me at the time and made, an adventure and the best out of it. And it's interesting to now look at that sort of approach to things and how I'm forced to make a plan, to make a map, to make a next. And it's that I think has thrown me a little bit out of my comfort zone to have to do that and navigate that way.
Yeah, I never had a long-term plan. It was always, if this goes bad, it was more like a domino type.
Yeah.
Even growing up in high school, it'd be like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I'm not very good at school. I'm not going to be an engineer. I'm not going to be a doctor like my other best friends were. I was like, well, I'm going to go into business administration because I can do anything. And I'll kind of figure out as I go. And then it was, like you said, though, it was opportunity based. So every time I'd be working at a job and an opportunity would come up and it was never the right time, which I then learned it's not about like right time. It's like, is this a good opportunity or not? The first one, my wife was like, I want to say less than 3 months pregnant. And I was like in this really safe job that I'd been working at for 7 years out of school. I could still be there today if I wanted to.
Yeah.
But it was like, wow, there's a really good opportunity to jump into digital marketing. I don't even know what that means yet. And I took that job and it was scary as all hell because of like so much uncertainty. And the second one, moving up here and taking a job, I think Foster, my youngest son, was less than a year old, which was like a scary thing. And I just grew up in Whitby, in Durham, and this opportunity was presented to me, and I told the guy at first, I'm like, no, just no. And then I went home and I talked to my wife and started thinking about it. I'm like, well, there's actually some decent opportunity here, and took that opportunity. And it was more opportunity-based versus plan, because I never had like
a master plan.
No, I wasn't like, okay, I want to work here for 10 years and I'm going to jump into my own. It was taking these opportunities, even when they were not the right time. Like safety-wise, I should have stayed at that first job forever type of thing.
Yeah.
But it was like, this is a really good opportunity. I could see my way through like that fog and forest to the other side of it. So
it's so neat because you're never sure when those things come up. And I'm not convinced you necessarily need a map. Because a lot of times people in their own business, like it's always fun to hear the story because it's never like, well, when I was little, I planned to do this. And then I made all these logical moves that helped me do it. And I think some people make that plan out a little bit, but often it's like exploring that life's journey and then something comes up and you do it. So I'm curious with your business, and you sort of hinted at planning next steps. Do you have a grander vision for the business or a plan, or is it still kind of like responding and doing things that you like?
There's a little bit of response still happening. I think now that the landscape of retail and just the landscape in general with things opening back up and, people are able to travel again, you have to have that element of response when you're in a consumer product, customer, based sales. You have to have a bit of response to that. But, if money was no object, sure, I've got, these grand dreams and plans and idea. And some of them do kind of root back to where I would dream and, plan from an earlier age of, I'd always loved fashion and I always, had a knack and draw to that. And of course, when you go through for any type of schooling, you have to do, different presentations and different plans. And so in this way and weird sense, I've been building this for years, sort of unintentionally, or had a concept before and now things have changed and I've actually been doing it. So there's elements of it that still exist, but they've just kind of grown and flourished and developed. So yeah, I would love to have a storefront or storefronts where there's textiles on the wall and people can come in with their, existing garments and how do we upcycle them, or here's what you can pick from that we've diverted from, the landfill, or different suppliers that I work with that are organic and, eco-friendly, and having a place that people can shop and create different things that aren't, made overseas or made in high pollution, content situations, a lot like what Unwrapped offers, downtown here, in that same vein, but in a little bit of a textile flair to it, or a customizable flair to it. But the reality of that is, a huge investment and, maybe some investors. And so I don't know that I'm quite there yet, as much as I would love to be tomorrow, to just, turn that key and have that storefront. So there's always that dream and goal and plan. And it's just sort of navigating and responding to what's in front of me today to see, is that, attainable? Is that something that's going to happen? And if it's not, how do I pivot and respond and go in a different direction?
So neat. How do you decide what to make?
Sometimes I will have a purpose or a function for something. 90% of the time, the textile inspires me. When it's something purely out of my own creative development, meaning I haven't had a customer that's come to me to say, I'm looking for this, or I really loved this shirt, but the fit wasn't great. Could you, do something similar? Or I'm looking for couch cushions or anything like that. So if it's purely me being creative, which also is interesting to kind of navigate, I wish I had more time to do that. I find I've come up with some of my best work, or stuff that I'm really proud of as, I would say, an artist, that kind of fills that cup, that fills my soul and keeps me going through everything. But it's hard to find that time and, to make that time lucrative for you, especially in an artistic form. That's not necessarily going to translate into a sale. So it depends, if I have that creative freedom and that time and that outlet, it might be something that I just start working with a piece of material and it naturally evolves, or I'm inspired to make something. I can see something through, just walking out, social media, online, magazine, whatever, and just take something and spin it and be inspired that way as well.
Fascinating. How do you find your material?
I work with a lot of suppliers online because there is a lot of manufacturing that happens in these key segment geographically. They will have a lot of online presence to sell the materials, and then we kind of intercept as makers to divert that landfill waste. So there are some really key companies that exist out there. And then others just, searching, stumbling, going to different maker markets, speaking to other entrepreneurs that work in, the textile realm of things, and where do you source your material, and networking that way, which has been kind of interesting. There are a lot of times that people will donate materials to me. Their grandmother passed away, they got all this material, or, something that they inherited and they don't really know what to do with. And so I'll either make them something from it, or if it's decent enough quality and I feel like it's worth purchasing from them and then having kind of in my stock and assortment, that also happens.
Why were those sustainable textiles important to you? Was it a passion thing, or was it like a business decision?
It was a passion thing, and it happened really organically. So when I was starting out just trying to contribute and ultimately then doing the fundraiser for the masks and matching scrunchies, because everything was closed down and you really couldn't shop and access. I would just reach out to a couple of my girlfriends, and their, moms made quilts or what have you, or just stuff I had kicking around for years. Because if anyone is in the crafting or making realm of things, this will totally resonate. You always have a stash of something somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
You'll come across, a store or a yard sale or something, which hence why some, customers have sold me or given me some fabric. It's, it's just a thing. So I would just ask, do you guys have any remnant materials? And that's what I would make the pieces out of. And around the same time, I don't know if they started as a business at that time or if it was shortly before, just a combination of exposure online and their advertising. I stumbled on FabCycle, which is in Vancouver, and they are dedicated directly to reducing and eliminating and reverting textiles from entering the landfill. And so they became a really strong kind of partner, if you will, of my brand, not partnership, but just really playing into that role. And as I got looking into it and thinking about it, and you do learn some of this in school when you do any type of fashion studying and courses, but now, of course, with social media and all that kind of stuff, there's this huge light on how much the fashion industry contributes to pollution and how much waste there is. And so it just sort of organically happened. And I thought, yeah, I want to have a purpose, and I want to have, a product that has a bigger, better story, not just contributing to consumerism and, perpetuating this eco issue that exists. And it just happened that way. And the more I used those materials and created really unique pieces from that, and the demand and the attention was there by the customer to continue to provide it. So it just evolved.
How did all these textiles get into landfills? Is it the manufacturers?
So when there's a textile produced, generally it is produced with a purpose, whether it's to make a shirt for, mass production, or whether it's intended to be resold for fabric stores. It always is produced with an intent. And when that intent is either not met or fulfilled, so, a clothing line runs 70 shirts, and after those 70 shirts are produced, all those remnant materials, or the end of the bolt, end of the line material, doesn't get used. It has no purpose, and a lot of the time it will in the landfill.
They don't have any other alternative? Like, they won't sell the textile back to someone or anything?
There are now becoming these platforms, and that's where I'm trying to, find those providers and suppliers, support that initiative. And I think there are some fashion businesses and lines and collections and brands that are becoming a bit more conscious of that, and making better decisions that way, but making better estimates on what their production line will be, so that there isn't as much waste. So yes, there are. I just think for how much is manufactured in the world globally, and different countries and different places have different rules and regulations and restrictions. And I'm learning every day more and more about some of that stuff. It just exists because as consumers, we are constantly running through so much product, fast fashion being a huge element of the fashion industry, the retail world in particular, for a really long period of time through, the 90s and 2000s. I think that had a lot to do with it as well.
What's fast fashion? Sorry, now this has become a conversation like Matt doesn't know anything about anything. I was asking, I'm sorry, but
fast fashion is really stuff that is manufactured and produced at a very, very low cost to the manufacturer, to the brand, and in turn sold back to the customer, or sold directly to the customer at a very affordable price point. but the longevity and the quality of the item is really not there. And so you cycle through it fast. It is probably what contributes to, I would say, 80% of the inventory that you see in thrift stores today.
Oh,
so
wow.
if you go through the racks at the thrift stores and you take a look at some of the consistent logos that you would see there,
Okay.
you're going to be able to identify some fast fashion brands.
Interesting. Yeah, so I won't make fun of, or I won't say anything negative about like small businesses, but I'll make fun of Shein, for instance. So like this is Shein you're talking about? Or is it like other department stores? Like, is it Winners that are bringing in like those big brands, like you're saying? Or
So Winners model is interesting. They are buying either products that the contract or purchase agreement fell through. There was an order that was canceled. There was, overstock, or a brand didn't sell through the inventory, and so they're trying to make clearance in their warehouse so they can bring in goods. That makes up a large portion of their buying model.
Okay.
I'm talking more like what you would see on lower end price point retail platforms,
like in the malls and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think I can.
3 for $10 t-shirts.
Yeah, yeah. I think I can fairly say, without offending anybody, Forever 21 fits in that brand and category, and they don't exist in the Canadian marketplace anymore. Oh, really? So they closed. Gosh, it's a bit of a blur these past 5 years, but
the retail market is always changing for clothing. This is such a fascinating conversation because there's so many just fundamentals of economics at play. Like
a lot of facets to
the fashion industry's age old. Like people have had textiles and covered themselves in clothing forever. Humans like surrounding themselves with fine things. They like to wear different things. You talked about like the big manufacturing and just the waste. It's like cheaper to just throw out extra runs of material if you're not going to use it. So you see all the giant manufacturing and sort of pollution of that. So it's really fascinating. Everyone still wears clothes every day. So
I think as consumers, it's our responsibility, and part of where I want to have an impact with my brand and messaging is just to give a little bit of information and insight to it. Because as consumers, we have a lot of power around impacting that, making those decisions. And if we choose not to purchase or support, in that vein of production or in that line of, environmental impact, we can essentially, eliminate it. But there's a huge, toss up to that. Financially, it makes things more costly. And, I don't begrudge anyone who can't afford to, make that purchase because they have, a family to feed. It's a fine line. It's a battle. It's, a bit of a teeter of what to do and how you can kind of make that environmental conscious decision. And so that's also something I'm trying to do, is make things that are affordable, attainable, but still have, that consciousness and that impact.
It's awesome. Do you think sort of the trend of like decentralization that we see in other industries? We've talked before on the podcast about, for example, bakeries. So for age old, every neighborhood, there's a bakery for a certain number of people. And, then big, the Westons came along. We always hail our favorite oligarchs on this show in a joking manner, create massive bread factories and, all the bakers shut down. But now we're starting to see, a lot more neighborhood bakeries and smaller community bakers. There's some themes to the circular economy for that. Do you think clothing will be doing that more and more, or do you think there will still be a huge impact on the giant centralized?
I hope it goes there. I think it's going to be really hard. And I think, as I say, as consumers, it's up to us to make that decision. It's tough. I think one of the great things that came from the pandemic was that support local, support one another, however, just because you're purchasing local doesn't mean that item is clean or, eco-friendly, or, the production didn't happen, overseas, mass produced fast fashion, that kind of thing. So I don't think it will ever completely go away unless, one of the key prongs to that industry, completely crumbles. And I wish that on no one, obviously, because that is a livelihood for someone somewhere. But I think you're seeing a bit more awareness to it. I think you're seeing more consciousness to it. I certainly have, met a lot of customers and consumers at the markets and different people that I speak with and engage with. And the younger generation is more aware of it. And I think if we can continue to provide them with products that fit that bill or that meet that environmental awareness consciousness, but we can do it affordably, that's when, it will start to seep its way into a larger scale and will become, a commonality. I think it needs to run its course and change organically before that happens on a mass scale.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating to think about, because I think, again, it's about balance. And I think with social media, more information, we can see like people have just easier access, I think, to makers a little bit more. And, you might not change all of your clothing over to that eco-friendly maker. But,
Yeah.
When people like that unique fashion, that again is a trend that's never going away, and you can get a piece that's like made locally, diverted textile, has a story, nobody or very few others have something similar, I think is just a fascinating trend. And you're right, the younger generation is more in tune with that and understands that sort of as part of that value.
Well, and I think that goes back to, and I'm by no means an expert in this area, but, you think back to the marketing and consumer exposure that the generation, prior to us, baby boomers, that kind of thing, what they were subjected to and objected to from a marketing and consumer perspective, that had a trickle effect into a lot of generations. So it was keeping up with the Joneses and how do you have a new this, or, the latest item. And it was a symbolic.
New, yeah.
Yeah. And it was a symbolic of status, really. And I think if we can slowly do away with that, and I think we're headed in that direction. There's a lot of different capsule wardrobe conversations, or, the shows on Netflix where, tiny homes minimize your living, small spaces, organizing your closet and getting rid of those things that, essentially you don't need or you don't use anyway. If we can get to a point where we never purchase them to begin with, I think it will go a long way to our consumerism. I think it will help, local makers, or not even local makers, just local, regionally to you made, or with more intent and purpose pieces that are made. And it goes beyond clothing.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. This is kind of related. Do you think the term spinster might get taken back to what it sort of originally was? I know it turned into like an insult, or people be like, oh, an unmarried person is a spinster, but that was an occupation, because in a population, you needed people who made clothes. So it was a thing that, happened a lot more. And then, centralization, manufacturing, lost some of that skill and occupation.
I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe.
I think it's fascinating, because a business like you is very dependent on you creating.
Yes.
So it's also really hard to scale. So if
Absolutely.
you were like, okay, I want to be the fashion designer that's the biggest in the world, before long you start talking about getting stuff made overseas and brought over, and really hard to do. But, if you can sort of expand that skill again of that trade, you can have more makers and more unique things.
Yeah, and that's the battle, is how do you scale? How do you continue to grow your offering product wise, but also your market, but not compromise that integrity? And there has to be a demand. B, there has to be a good sort of model behind it. And I by no means have all the answers yet, but figuring it out as I go. And I think a shift in mindset, as I've said, for the consumerism, maybe you rework the item that you have or fix it as opposed to tossing it out and buying something new. There's obviously, a lot of options out there, and financially it might be cheaper to just buy something new and discard of the old as opposed to fixing it. But what's the repercussion of that? What's the long-term penalty of it?
I find it so fascinating to sort of talk about these things, because I think, again, everyone's always going to wear clothes and they're going to want things that are nice, and like that's not going to change. But what could change, if that mindset is adopted and people stop, reaching for the 5-pack of T-shirts or the cheap things that get thrown out, or and have more of that circular economy, local made stuff, is just a really neat potential to think about.
Yeah, I certainly learn something new every day, and navigating as a business myself. That's why a lot of large brands and large retailers have been so globally successful, is because they continue to sell and sell and sell and repeat and repeat and repeat. And that's where their growth and really their financial growth comes from. So what does it look like to create a really good piece that somebody buys once and they really don't come back and repeat as a customer for you? How do you make that lucrative? And really, I've come to learn through the various careers and the journeys that I've gone through with jobs and industries. And I just want that kind of lucrativeness to provide a comfortable lifestyle. I'm not looking to, have a mansion in the Hamptons.
Yeah.
I don't want to, perpetuate that excessive consumerism in that sense either. So I think it's overall sort of, not just my consumers shifting their change and their consumerism approach. It's and lifestyle. It's myself as well. I think it's everybody, and just being satisfied with what you have, making use with what you have, and not being as greedy for the next best thing.
It's fascinating too, just to be very brief. This industry, has a lot of economic fundamentals, but in the long run, there's no economic profit. So even when you look at a lot of those big brands, when you really dive in, a lot of it's marketing, spending a lot of money, and then, as we all know from big retail in the malls, they all close as well. So you get these new fashion stores, they come in, they seem to be doing really well, but then they go bankrupt, and there's like that cycle. And I think that creates an opportunity for someone like yourself to kind of fly under their radar a little bit, but create something that's very sustainable. And you might not be able to scale and be like them, but you don't want to do that anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And you said it earlier with social media and different platforms. This has opened up a huge opportunity for different companies and brands and industries to thrive where it never existed before. When I did go to school for fashion design, I did a year of the 2-year program, and I thought, I'm never going to be able to have a job or a career in this. In the Canadian market, it's a totally different fashion landscape and industry than it is in the US and in other places around the world. And we weren't having a lot of manufacturing done here the way that we had historically. And so the jobs that you would walk into were really, pattern drafting and not anything that I gravitated towards. And so I really felt like I would never have a job or any type of, it would just be a passion and I would just be able to do it when I wanted. And now
here you are.
You circle around and these different platforms have been opened and there's tons of brands that purely exist online through social media, and they have great impact stories and they have great, contributions and consciousness to their production and manufacturing, and they wouldn't exist if it weren't for the collapse of some of the brands, as you say, and that cyclical, journey, but also they wouldn't exist for, if it weren't for some of the media, social media and internet platforms that exist today.
It's awesome. It's just neat to think what the future holds, because I think you hear it a lot in conversations. People say, oh, things have changed. It's not as easy as it was. And I think that all sorts of people are saying that at any given time. But I just think that you're on the early days of potential, and technology will change, mindsets will change. People are still going to want to wear their nice, fancy things. So it's going to be really exciting to see what happens with you over the future.
I hope I'm on the top end of that. Trying to anyway. So we'll see where it goes.
Well, that's exciting. Any final thoughts?
Thank you so much for asking me to be here and chatting with me.
Awesome. Thank you. So thank you for listening. If you would like to be on the podcast, we would love to have you. If you'd like to work with us, you can check us out at kawarthasmallbusinesspodcast.ca. And our email, if you want to just go ahead and schedule that, you can reach us at setitup@kawarthasmallbusinesspodcast.ca.